Remarkable speech by Donald Trump last night. He officially accepted the nomination to be the Republican presidential candidate. A 90-minute speech, a lot of it extemporized at the Republican National Convention in Wisconsin, talking about the assassination attempt, amongst other things, saying that he now has God on his side and how close the bullet came to killing him. Nicky Morgan, I mean, was it a different Trump? A lot of people saying, well, let me give you the thoughts of one Times listener who says Trump sounds like a 1980s Christian evangelist on sleeping tablets. He was toned down and he has clearly got God.
Well, he got gone for the speech. I don't know whether there's been some sort of Damascene conversion. I think Trump's own religious views have always been slightly uncertain. We were discussing last Friday the sort of the fact that in the US politicians do need to have God in a way that they don't. We were talking about the UK in particular. So I mean, I think the thing that struck me was, a 90-minute speech. I mean, I've been in some speeches that have felt like 90 minutes. But I mean, 90 minutes, apparently even I mean, at the beginning, apparently it was all silence because he was talking about last weekend's assassination attempt. And you could have heard a pin drop. I think it didn't carry on like that. And as I understand it, even the, sort of very committed delegates began to get a bit restless towards the end of 90 minutes. I mean, personally, look, I think at the end of the day, what's fascinating is just how united the Republican convention and the Republican Party appears to be. His pick of vice presidential running mate appears to have gone down well with the base, and they clearly are a party focused on getting into government. So do I think Trump's changed by this? No. I mean, I think anyone, obviously a brush with death concentrates anybody's mind, but I think that it didn't take long for him to go back to sort of typical subjects that he's talked about a lot. I think the fascinating thing really for politics watchers is now what's going to happen in the Democrats. And I think probably seeing that united Republican Party is probably really focusing minds of Democratic Party even more than it already had been.
We'll get on to that in a moment, but just on Jack, purely on the Trump speech, Nicky's right there, isn't it? There was this. He started off and people listened. I mean, this is a guy who had a near-death experience, and how close it was, you could see by his bandaged ear, as he said, another inch, and he was a goner. But then he said he'd be more unifying, but then he got back into, what was it? Build the wall. He's got to finish the wall, of course. Drill, baby, drill. That's another one of the old classics, isn't there? And of course, the last election, they cheated me out of it. And rather ominously, he said, and it won't happen again. There are thoughts that if he does win the White House, and he has to leave after his second term, that he just won't.
I do think the most interesting thing is that this change in tone wasn't really just in the past week. That there was a big change in the debate as well. We remember just back a few weeks ago, where instead of attacking Joe Biden, he just kind of stood and watched and shook his head occasionally and let Joe Biden make his own mistakes. And I think this is a very different Trump campaign. It's not in that aggressive 2016 Trump, Steve Bannon mode of, build the base, hit out at everybody, be as controversial and outrageous as you possibly can be. He's the front runner now, and he's taking a very different approach. I suppose as a front runner, you do have to do that. But it will be really interesting to see how, if the Democrats change the candidate, how that then is affected, because you can do that if you're beating an older candidate who looks like he isn't going to catch up with you, then you can take that more measured approach that Trump has been trying to portray for the last 6 weeks or so.
Well, Kate and I mean, we've all been discussing
candidate, then that's a very different ballgame.
Yeah, well, let's move on to that. Kate and I were both discussing that. Everyone's been discussing that this morning. You mentioned the old bombastic Trump. I mean, remember the 2020 election, it was Sleepy Joe. Well, now we could throw in semi-senile Joe. Couldn't he? Left all that alone, all the
He
horrible
didn't-
nicknames.
Yes,
he
didn't.
wants him there, doesn't he? He wants to fight him.
Yeah, he didn't need to mention it because Joe Biden is sadly imploding things all by himself, or is that his Democrat advisors? We don't know. What we do know is that we're being told Biden may quit the election by the weekend. We were told that by a former Obama and John Kerry staffer, Zach Friend, earlier. Lots of conversations going on at the moment. And of course, timing is crucial because you've got the Democrat convention beginning in August as well. Already in the last 24 hours, the US Representative Jamie Raskin has appealed to Biden to consider ending his re-election campaign. The Montana Senator John Tester called on Mr. Biden not to seek re-election in November. And that is, just literally within the last 24 hours. We've started to see a swell of voices saying that they no longer believe that Joe Biden is the man to beat Donald Trump. The polling reflects that as well. The only problem, Nikki, is that the only person able to make this decision is Joe Biden.
Absolutely, but I thought the interview that you did earlier on, Kate, was fascinating with the guy from the Obama and Kerry campaigns, because his point was that usually Obama and Pelosi and sort of senior Democrats, their conversations do not leak. And the fact that they are leaking, and the fact that Nancy Pelosi is clear, she's a very old friend of Joe Biden's, couldn't be clearer. And I don't think that they would, this close to an election, very senior Democrats would not allow their conversations to leak if they did not think it was going to lead to some movement. So I do wonder whether, and didn't Joe Biden, he gave an interview earlier on this week. I mean, he'd given that interview about only God can tell me to go about 10 days ago. And then earlier this week, he gave another interview in which, there was just a little, I can't quite remember the phrase used now, but it was like a little chink in the armor. And then obviously catching COVID. And yes, only he can decide. But the other person who I think is deeply influential, obviously, is his wife. Maybe people know that they are having conversations. Kamala Harris, as VP, has been incredibly loyal and incredibly silent. I suspect because she knows that probably, I think she'll have to be the person to step up if Biden does suddenly say that he is going. And I do think seeing that united Republican convention and Trump being the kind of, as you say, the way he was and everything else, will focus Democrat minds.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about the leaking. It is intentional leaking. Nancy Pelosi, according to some of the reports I've seen, wanted to keep this behind the scenes, wanted to address the matter privately. But when Biden and his inner circle refused to listen, she and other senior Democrats resorted to leaking conversations to the media. And that is why there's another piece up in the New York Times, first thing this morning, actually, talking about more advisors, people close to Biden, saying that he appears to have accepted he may have to drop out. Again, the language is changing ever so subtly, isn't it, as the days go on. Super interesting, that. Quick couple of messages, if we can. We've got some in on Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump's religious beliefs and views are flexible according to the day of the week and his audience, says Lisa. You may mock Donald Trump, but his followers lapped it up. As for Biden, I think God has spoken. It really is time for him to go, says Amanda.
Interesting one on the strategy from Adam on the Republican strategy. Is Trump carrying the Ming vase? Of course, famously the strategy that Labour was seen to employ in the election that just passed 2 weeks ago, i.e. don't make any mistakes. To paraphrase Napoleon, don't interrupt your enemy when they're making mistakes. Yeah, he kept it reined in for a bit, but then he had to stop. Now, coming up, our panel, Jack and Nicky are going to stay with us.